Sometimes we build objects that are quite complex, and often these objects have a set of independent concerns that they implement. Let's say we're building a printer. A printer can be a very complex object that implements multiple concerns. For example, one of the concerns of printer is to queue the jobs and prioritize them based on whatever strategy that we may have for queuing. Another concern that we may have to implement is the notification of users. We may also need to keep track of users and who have access to various things, so some kind of user management. There are several independent concerns being implemented by a single printer. The strategy pattern gives us a chance to separate some of these concerns and break them into what we call strategies. Before we dive into the pattern, let's take a look at some of the mistakes that designers sometimes do. Often, what they do is they expose this complexity to the client by adding multiple implementations. We might, for instance, ask the user to use a printer queue to add the element into that, and then maybe later on register for completions of job by the printer in a different place. Now, the user really sees this object as a single object. And the fact that they have to deal with multiple elements or multiple objects to deal with their jobs or to get the printer to work is an additional complexity to the client that they don't appreciate. So the client wants to see a single printer, but we, for implementation reasons, want to break the printer into pieces. One of the golden heuristics of object oriented design is to always reflect your client's views. So we will let the client have a single object, the printer. We will still split up the printer into pieces. We would just hide that from the client. Now we'll start by taking an example of the printer queue. I'll break up the printer queue and put it into a separate object that we're going to call a strategy. Printer will know that as a print queue, and it will use this object behind the scene through a well-defined interface. And the key for this to work properly would be that it is hidden from the client and it does not introduce any new complexity to the client. In other words, the client's idea of what a printer is not compromised. The strategy dictates that we come up with an abstraction for the orthogonal concern or the independent concern. Perhaps here just queue or print a queue that would have things like add, remove, and get first job in the queue. The interface defines the strategy, and we can have multiple implementations of that strategy. For instance, a simple FIFO queue or first in, first out queue, but any other variations on queues would be possible. So notice a few characteristics of this solution. The client is not impacted at all. They are using the printer. The printer internally breaks out a part of its responsibility into what we call a strategy. It defines an interface for that strategy that defines the abstraction, and it may have multiple variations of implementations of that strategy. And the printer will forward to that concern or the strategy whenever it's responsibility to do some part of the job that is conceptually the responsibility of the printer.